Ooh.
Well, we had,
Hi, everybody. If you want to put in the chat, tell us where you're calling in from tonight. Make sure to put change that from all panelists, the little caret going down, and make it all panelists and attendees, and then everybody else will see it too, not just the 4 of us. Hi, everybody. Yeah.
although it still looks like there's 2 of you, Vivian.
Oh, drat. If only I could do that.
Well, Hermione can figure it out, and so
There we
I'm sure
go.
you can too. So
I hid non-video participant. I don't know if that works for everyone, but there's now one Vivian on my screen. I got an error when starting the stream, and then it said, "Congratulations, your stream is running."
okay, are you streaming?
Yeah.
All right. Well, it is the top of the hour, and so I think we should start. So hello, everyone, and welcome to the May NASA Night Sky Network webinar. We're hosting tonight's webinar as usual from the offices, well, actually not in the offices of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, but close to the offices of the ASP in San Francisco, California. We're very excited to present this evening's webinar with our guest speaker, Brandon Reddell from NASA Johnson Space Center. And welcome to everyone who's joining us on the live stream. We're very happy to have you with us. These webinars are monthly events from the Night Sky Network, though we look forward to live streaming them now and into the future. For more information about the NASA Night Sky Network and the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, please check the links in the chat. And I think that Vivian will add those at some point here. Before we introduce Brandon, here's Dave Prosper with a couple of announcements. Dave.
Alrighty. Hi, folks. Wrote this a little earlier, and I have to make a slight revision because the big news today was the launch of Demo 2 and Doug and Bob, but that is now delayed due to weather until Saturday. But if you're still looking for some educational outreach tools to use in conjunction with the launch, NASA STEM has released the Commercial Crew Launch Toolkit, and I'm going to put the link in the chat for everyone here. And I'm going to get the folks on YouTube in their chat for a second too. 1 second, 2 chats. And there we go. You can also just go to NASA STEM engagement on social media, and they have it right up there too. And the Night Sky Network social media pages. And I just wanted to add, I also attended a couple of virtual events Friday evening, which was actually a wonderful way to close out my week. And they're a delight. I just want to wish everyone good luck for doing your own virtual outreach. And just remember, if you're worried about having a rough start or having a buggy event, that's fine, because we learn by doing, and we're all learning right now. And again, if you need to reach us for anything with questions with the program or whatever, email us at nightskyinfo@astrosociety.org, or on messages on social media at Night Sky Network. And of course, the awesome Andy Sherwood can also help you out with some program and website tips as well. And you can always find Andy at asherwood@astrosociety.org. And that's it for me. Back to you, Brian.
Thanks, Dave. So for those of you who are on Zoom, you can find the chat window, and some of you have found that. Please make sure that you select all panelists and attendees. It defaults to just panelists, but all of your friends out there would like to know who you are and where you're from, and that way you get a chance to greet them. So again, select all panelists and attendees. Also at the bottom of your Zoom window is the Q&A window. Please make sure that you put your questions for Brandon into the Q&A window. We're going to take questions throughout, and so if some pertinent ones come up at the time that he's talking about them, we will bring those up at the time when it's very timely with his presentation. So again, put your questions for Brandon in the Q&A window. If you have, let's see, lost track of where we were here. So again, welcome to the May webinar of the NASA Night Sky Network. This month, we welcome Brandon Reddell to our webinar, who will share with us some of the exciting science that's going on the International Space Station. We were hoping that we were going to have a launch that was going there, so he's going to be talking about the science, some of the science that's taking place on the destination for the launch that is now going to be taking place on Saturday. So Dr. Reddell currently works in the International Space Station Research Integration Office, helping investigators get their research onto the ISS platform. He's also spent over 15 years working with ionizing radiation environments and effects for various NASA missions. He has a PhD in physics from the University of Houston and an MS in applied physics from Johns Hopkins University, with his interest being in high energy physics and space physics. He occasionally teaches physics and astronomy at the University of Houston at Clear Lake, and he's an avid amateur astronomer. And so I'm sure he could maybe even tell us which club you're associated with, if you're associated with, and maybe some of your friends are on. So please welcome Brandon Reddell.
Okay, hello everybody. Yeah, as you said, let me put my presentation here in presentation mode. Feel free to ask questions. So Brian, when I'm presenting, I don't see the Q&A, so you may have to interrupt me. I don't see the question list right here, but hopefully everybody can hear me okay right now.
Yep, we can hear you fine.
So yeah, I'm Brandon Reddell. I work for NASA at the Johnson Space Center in the ISS Research Integration Office. And it's actually kind of funny. Just last week, I was out at the Prude Ranch in West Texas, where they normally have the West Texas or the Texas Star Party, but it was canceled because of the COVID. But I was still able to get in about a week's worth of observations. So normally here in town, we have 3 clubs in the Houston area, and I'm part of the Johnson Space Center Astronomical Society. There's also the Houston Astronomical Society and the Fort Bend Astronomical Society. So let's get on with the talk. I have a lot of information, so like I said, feel free to interrupt. So as we know, the ISS is an orbiting laboratory. It's a space station going around the Earth. It's been in continuous presence with humans for at least 20 years now. We conduct research to aid basically in space exploration and to bring benefits down to for human benefits here on Earth, as well as develop new technologies. And so in this particular talk, it's really an ISS 101, right? It's kind of why do we do research? Why the ISS? What's so great about it that we can do the research? What are we learning from the ISS? And then I have several examples to kind of go over what we are learning. And it's really a broad scope of science range, anywhere from human health to black holes, basically. And so that's probably more of an interest to the astronomy group, but really, as you'll see, we hit on all subjects in science. So why do we explore? So in order to advance the human race, we must explore. It's in our history. Specifically,
excuse me, Brandon.
Yeah.
Were you meaning to have your slides up? Or are you? Is this the pre-slides section?
Now you've done it, Brian.
I think so.
Oh no!
Why?
We just
Okay,
wanted
maybe
the slides.
Song and dance time.
yeah. Do you? Okay, hold on. You don't see them?
Oh,
I
there
need to
we
have.
go.
No, we're not seeing the
My
slides.
Zoom.
So
You are or not?
we are not.
Okay. I think the Zoom's acting funny here again.
It's been doing that lately.
It may drop out and then come back in. Let's see here.
Because I don't see, usually I get an indication that of who it is that's sharing their screen, and I don't see that at all.
Oh, while we wait for Brendan to reconnect, this is a great time to mention that the Spot the Station website is a great resource to use to check out when the next space station flyby is going to happen over you. and that is at and I actually saw the station last night and wasn't sure if I had actually seen it, and I was able to confirm it at spotthestation.nasa.gov. So,
Okay, I'm back.
hi.
Sorry about that.
This
All
is
right,
what
so-
happens when we do this from home locations rather than the studio at work. So
Okay, so let me share my screen. Okay, let me know if you see my presentation popping up here.
not yet.
Ah,
Now we do. Now here it comes. All right.
Sorry, everybody. So I should have it in presentation mode. Let me know if it looks good.
yep, looks great.
Yep.
Okay.
Looks perfect.
So as I was saying, why do we explore, right? We must explore. Specifically, human space exploration helps to address fundamental questions about our place in the universe, our history in the solar system, and the development of the Earth. Through addressing the challenges related to human space exploration, we expand our technology, we create new industries, and help foster peaceful connection among nations, which is one of the big things that we've done with Space Station. Curiosity and exploration are vital to the spirit and in accepting the challenge of going deeper into space. Will invite the citizens of the world today and generations tomorrow. We're aspiring new people, the younger generation. So kind of looking back in the late 1700s, scientific discovery and people have always been curious, but around this time we started trained, or maybe even weren't even interested. They didn't. You guys still there?
Oh, yeah, we can hear you. You're just
Dropped
cutting
out
out.
for a moment.
Okay.
You dropped out for a moment. I'm going to blame it on the thunderstorms that you've been having.
Yeah, we've had a lot of thunder showers here. So also funding sources weren't around. So one of the first ones, though, after some of the late 1700s explorations by James Cook, kind of led to the first funding of Charles Darwin's expeditions on the Beagle. So what kind of benefits come from research in space? So we're enabling future exploration. We're making scientific discoveries. We're impacting life on Earth with those discoveries. There's all sorts of spin-offs that are used to advance our scientific knowledge and inspire new science. The ISS represents the most substantial capacity to do research in low Earth orbit today and probably for the next decade or so. When we look at the ISS as a whole, people really want to know what is the benefit of what's the return to the people, the taxpayers who pay for this, and it doesn't just rest on science alone. So real quick, just in case you don't know, the ISS is very big. So here's an image of what it would look like over, let's say, the size of a football field, or for our European friends, over the size of a soccer field. It's 925,000 pounds, so it's approaching a 1 million pound craft in space. It's a very large volume, 32,000 feet. I've heard people quote that saying it's equivalent to a 5-bedroom house, a 5-bedroom house. Low Earth orbit, so we're orbiting every 90 minutes at 17,000 miles an hour, and it's basically got laboratories from our 4 international space agencies: the US, Europe, Japan, and Russia. So let's talk a little bit about the engineering achievement. So the first area I want to talk about is this engineering achievement. And again, this kind of relates to what taxpayers might be interested in. So as you saw in the last picture, the station's very modularized, right? It was built in elements brought up on various vehicles. These individual modules were actually built from different countries. They never were fit checked on the ground, and first time was brought up on orbit and mated together on orbit. So it had to have been very remarkable tolerances to make this sort of work out. The modules also are interchangeable. We work through different engineering processes between the different countries and so forth. To build something this large is quite an achievement in itself. And then when you throw on top of that, just the operation of this, which continues on to today, working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, it's just continuous. The amount of planning, the logistics to support not only all the science, but the folks living on board. And so
Brandon, we have a question from Jason that seems to fit in here. He asks,
yeah.
How much power does it use and generate each Earth day?
So yeah, so I'm gonna talk about that on a later slide, but it's around 80 kilowatts of power. So we have 4 large solar array solar array cells, big wings, 160 volt arrays generating power. And I'll show you a chart later on where we talk a little bit about that, but it's in the kilowatt range. Another achievement, the international achievement. So this has been really important for the American people. So think about this for a minute. You know, when this was first starting up, we were shortly after the Cold War. Think about what it means to work with the Russians. You know, what we hear on the news is quite a different story than our actual working relationship with them. And, you know, some of the younger folks in their 20s and so forth might not remember what it was like, but certainly a lot of us in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s and older can probably appreciate that there was a lot to overcome there just on that alone. We make it look easy now, working with them and our international partners, but there's a lot of diplomacy involved and international meetings and agreements and barter agreements and so forth. So that's another achievement that we have. I'll just keep going if there's any more questions.
We have a question from Steph, but I suspect that you might get to it a little bit later. She asks, how are experiments chosen or selected for the ISS? Is there a petition process?
Yeah. So there's a proposal, and I'm going to talk, like you said, a little bit about this. But the short of it is that we have sponsors of research. There's usually a proposal, a research call, and people respond to those and get funding that way. Usually working through academic institutions or NASA themselves or other government agencies. And then I'll mention some of the details of working with the ISS National Lab that allows folks from industry, also academia and other locations to bring science on board station as well. That's a good question. Excuse me, let's go back. Scientific achievement. So I guess, the question is, the station's built, we're not really building it anymore. So what's carrying this forward? And that's really the scientific endeavor that we're in right now. We're currently in this era of research and technology demonstration. So the value from this alone will carry the ISS forward and help us convince the government, for more funding and to continue these, bringing these benefits down to Earth and so forth. We'll always get questions about, the universe and science in general. So there will always be a spark of interest to do the research. And then on top of that, we're seeing a huge benefit on the ground and improvement for humans here on Earth as well. So there's additional benefits, both for our health reasons and for business sense and so forth. And so those are the kind of questions that are driving us forward as well. Speaking of the commercial side, here's a picture. So this is a CubeSat being launched off a space station. So we're just now seeing, we've been working with commercial companies for a while. We have SpaceX, as you talked about today, launching our first crew. We also have Boeing, and soon we'll have Sierra Nevada. We've had companies bringing up commercial cargo for five years or more now. So it's just continuing to spark the government and other commercial industry partnerships, as well as new businesses too. So also I'd like to mention this last summer, NASA basically announced plans to basically to expand commercial capabilities in low Earth orbit and introducing this concept called private astronaut missions, where companies can actually send up their own astronauts, or even purchase time with the current astronauts to achieve some of their business goals up in space. Okay, so here's some interesting stats for you. So this is basically through increment 60, which pretty much was through the end of last year. We're currently in increment 63 right now. 61, 62, we don't have the numbers in yet, but they'll go up just a little bit from what I'm showing here. But basically we have 108 countries participating, basically in either research or education on the ISS. When you look at the total number of investigations at any given time, we're up around 300 at any given instant. But over the course of the lifetime of the station, we've had almost 3,000 different investigations. In general, almost half of them are U.S. led, closer to 40% maybe. But with each increment pair, we have generally new investigations coming on, maybe as much as a third or so. We've had over 4,200 investigators involved, and last count I've seen from our statistics is over 1,800 scientific journal publications. So there's a lot of factors influencing research on the ISS. So we have a suite of factors that can decrease the demand for using ISS as a laboratory. Some of these are resource limitations, like how much up mass we can bring up on each rocket launch, and down mass. And then the premium is crew time. How much crew time do we have available for the astronauts to help in the science? There's also operational things like EVAs, for instance. Last year we did the AMS EVAs, and that took a big hit in science crew time available for science last year. And so there's also various cost impacts, such as the cost of the payload development itself, or the processes involved to bring experiments up on station, and working through the safety processes and all the hardware integration issues and things like that. And so we've been working to streamline that quite a bit and made tremendous progress. And we continue to always streamline this and make it reasonable. But at the end, safety is a real big issue for all experiments going up on the space station. So you can think of that as the weighty side pushing the teeter-totter down, but on the opposite side, there's several factors that increase the demand. One of them is just research demand. NASA funds research on ISS. We get grants to do research, and people come and do the research. There's also non-NASA funding. That's very important too, especially coming in from industry. We have pharmaceutical companies are good examples of this. They see strategic and advantage and contribute something that they get to produce, improve their products, and market here down on Earth. And then also there's the big visible science, the big breakthrough science that drives a lot of the research demand. And so usually that comes with full funding on the NASA side and so forth. And so it's a finely tuned balance beam, if you will, of balancing all these pros and cons. So I mentioned that National Lab. So in 2005, Congress passed, basically a law stating that, designating the ISS as a national laboratory. So it's very much like something like Los Alamos National Laboratory, right? So this is a laboratory that's up, in space. And with that, there's an organization called the ISS National Lab. And through them, we can do non-NASA research where, like I was talking about, so folks from industry and academia have a way to bring science in through the National Lab side. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where we draw the dividing line between these two here in a few minutes. Oh yeah, here we go. So yeah, if you look at this picture here, this is sort of a graphic, it's not exact, right? But it's showing the disciplines of where we do science. It's a wide range from biology and biotechnology, human physiology and performance under human research, We have technology demonstration, we have physical science, and then earth and space science and education. And so you can think of these boxes here that, the more they are on the blue side is more weighted towards the type of research that NASA does, whereas on the orange side, more what National Lab seems to focus on. So, if you look at earth and space science, it's kind of like a 50-50 mix between the two. The way the crew time works on space station, basically, after we honor our international agreements with our partners, the remaining crew time is split basically 50-50 between NASA and National Lab. So the National Lab tends to focus a lot more on education, whereas if you look, NASA is mainly focused in human research, tech demos, and physical sciences. A lot of that's because of our exploration goals. So why do we do research?
So, Brandon, here's an interesting question. And so William asked a question. If Tom Cruise really does go for, and I'm embellishing this a little bit, if Tom Cruise really goes, makes a movie, how are they going to code their time for, hosting him and the movie crew?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. I don't know, but I suspect coming in through these private astronaut missions, there's a lot of guidelines, and I'll show you the link towards the end of the talk, and you're welcome to go look at that. But there's actually a document that breaks down what it costs, to use the crew, and because it takes resources to bring other people up there, right? They have to. There's living space, there's like food and stuff like that, right? But then there's the time, it may take away from other systems level work and things like that. So there'll have to be an agreement of some sort work. And to be honest, I don't know how that is. This will be the first time, right? But it's I suspect it'll come through on this private astronaut and commercial agreement. It's one of the first kind of uses of that. That's a really good question, but to be honest, I don't have the full answer. But that is a good question. So, yeah, why do we do research on ISS? So the first and most obvious reason is the microgravity environment. Gravity is a constant force on Earth, right? We can't get away from it. It affects everything on Earth. It cannot be completely controlled or removed in the experiments here on the ground. It often dominates, and sometimes it masks other forces in play during our experiments. The ISS provides a laboratory environment where gravity is essentially gone. And so that opens up the visibility into deeper science and mechanisms operating in the research. Also, the ISS is a low Earth orbit. In low Earth orbit, it has an amazing view. So that's a very attractive for Earth observing instruments, as well as deep space instruments. And we'll talk a little bit about those. And then technology demonstration. There's a whole suite of investigations looking to test, ISS here in low Earth orbit, where we're relatively close to the Earth, where we can have the flexibility to bring instruments back and forth, make tweaks here and there and send them and try them out, before we actually have to do this for real on a 4-day mission to the moon or somewhere like that. And so that's very important for technology demonstration. And then also, we're exposed to very harsh conditions. Not only do we have the vacuum of space, we have very extreme thermal conditions from being in full insulation versus the shadow, and we're exposed to the trapped radiation belts and galactic cosmic radiation. The upper atmosphere, we have atomic oxygen that's has huge effects on materials, and then there's also micrometeoroids. So we're exposed to all these things, and we'll encounter these on any long duration mission. So it's a good place to test out materials and how well our instruments work. So let's talk a little bit about, let's see, cell biology on ISS. So this is a kind of an interesting graphic. So we know cells live in a fluid environment and they respond to the force of gravity here on Earth, right? Through the typical mechanisms are convection and something called sedimentation. So this graphic is a nice demonstration or summary of what happens when you bring a cell to space. Cells have funny shapes on Earth, they're not perfectly spherical, but when you bring them up into microgravity, they suddenly become very spherical. They swell up too. It looks just like blobs of water you see, the astronauts playing with on TV, how you see them when they push water out into the cabin and make the surface tension forces pull that water together and it makes a perfect sphere. And so what we see in cells though is that, but inside cells, we see that gene expression changes in the cytoskeleton or the structure inside the cells. We see changes in signal transduction on the way cells talk between themselves. We see differences in their differentiation. What kind of cell it turns on? What does it grow into? We see totally different processes than we do on the one G and on the ground. And so one of the most important changes we see in terms of Earth applications is this process called tissue morphogenesis, which is a fancy way of saying the way that lots of cells kind of come together to make tissue, for instance, that totally changes in space. Tissue morphogenesis looks more like it does on the ground than it does in 1G. What we're trying to show here on this bottom right side is to grow tissue on the ground, you have to have some kind of structure to have the tissue to form a shape around something like that. So in space, you don't need that internal structure. So that lets you actually grow tissue in a manner that looks more like the way our organs really are from natural processes. So that's very important. Why do we use model organisms? So you may know that we bring animals, flies, worms, and so forth, fish up there. So research on bacteria, yeast, insects, worms, fish, rodents, plants. They all show basic operating principles that are nearly the same in all living beings. So that's one reason why they study them in general, whether you're on the ground or in space. So bringing up convenient ones in space is very helpful. For instance, looking at rodents, right? That can shed light on, if we can shed any light in space in the absence of gravity on biological processes in rodents, there's a good application for humans here on Earth. Model organisms generally grow quickly compared to Earth samples. If you think about the lifetime of a human versus the lifetime of rodents, a typical a typical expedition on the space station is about 180 days. And that's somewhere around 30% of a rodent's lifetime. So you get, a lot more testing done throughout their lifetime processes, and that can be attributed and studied and applied to Earth humans as well. The other reason is there's a NRC decadal survey of 2011 that had strong recommendations for bringing rodents, really for the emphasis of understanding human physiology and processes, ultimately to benefit us for long duration flight. So basically in response to that, NASA's developed a rodent research program. It's been operating now for quite a while. First launch was, I believe, in SpaceX 4. We're currently on SpaceX 20, was the last cargo ship to visit station. So it's quite a while ago, but on that mission, we brought up 10 NASA mice and 10 cases or National Lab mice looking at different, we just sort of had different objectives. The NASA side was evaluating sort of hardware and how do you really do rodent operations in space? And on the National Lab side, there had pharmaceutical companies already kind of looking into evaluating like muscle atrophy or something like that. So animal research can be a touchy subject when we talk to folks, but we often remind people when you look at all the Nobel Prize winners and in medicine, 70 out of the last 100 have been involving human or animal research. So this is well in line with processes and studies and research on the ground. So plant biology. So plants are quite interesting. So I got a couple pictures here I'd like to walk you through. So plants growing on the right, on Earth, we know plants, like roots like to grow down and leaves and branches grow up right towards the sun. And so what people know is that there's basically some redundant systems that kind of make this happen. But what we see in microgravity is that things get confused. And what I mean by that is if you look at the top right, well, actually, before I talk about this, the systems that we're talking about is basically like a light sensing system and a gravity sensing system, right? By sensing gravity, roots know up and down, right? And same thing with the source of light, where it's coming from. And so that helps plants orient themselves, and that's important. So if you look on the top right here, excuse me, this is a picture of moss grown in the dark. And so this was a space shuttle flight, actually. Microgravity, just like space station. So we don't have the advantage. It was grown in the dark, so no light and no gravity. And so what happens, the mollusk doesn't know where to grow, so it grows in all directions. And so you get this funny kind of shape here. On the bottom, you can also see sort of this middle graphic here with the Earth and microgravity soil structure. So on Earth, if you think about it, when you have these particles in the soil and you have surface tension of water in the rocks in the soil, water tends to attract to the gravity tends to pull it down, but also attract to the rocks. But once you're in microgravity, you're only stuck with surface tension around the rocks. And so you don't get water settling down. You sort of get it evenly distributed. And so this has had a hard time for us, given us a hard time in growing plants on space. We've often drowned plants because too much water, not being able to respond properly with a root system that's oriented the right way. So this is a big issue. And if we're trying to grow our own food sources on a long duration mission, this is something we need to understand for a long duration flight. Let's see, how am I doing on time? About 8:36. Okay.
Yeah, we're doing good. We've got a couple of questions here that this
Sure.
looks like a good time. And so we have one that said, and this might apply to any of the organisms that are sent up. How do the mice or the plants survive the trip up to the ISS from the Earth?
So they're launched. They survive the trip just like humans do. They try to. The individual's craft are certified for low frequency vibrations and so forth, and they try to minimize that. They're well padded and so forth, and they're transported in containers that help protect them as well. And so it's really not a whole lot different than the humans surviving the short duration transit to station. They're often in a pressurized vessel, so there's an atmosphere and so forth. So it's really not all that different. And I know the scientists look at this, but there's an adaptation phase, just like the humans have, and so they have to take that into consideration as well. But the animals are well kept, and it's not as dramatic as some of the older films showing these high-speed reentries. It's kind of quite the opposite on the up flight. So it's not all that different, is what I would say.
Okay, we've got one other question that seems to fit in here, and so I'm guessing that the astronauts on the ISS are probably very rarely the ones who actually designed the research experiments that they're doing. And so how are they trained to conduct the selected experiments on station?
So they're trained on the ground before they go. So they spend, depending on the experiment and the procedures, they spend a lot of time working with the principal investigators, going through actual procedures. So they're trained pretty well. A lot of the science is, crew time is very limited up there. So they tried to optimize the procedures, try to involve the crew as little as possible, but there's some times where they have to do some work on the animals and so forth. So they're well trained in doing this beforehand. So I would just say it's good training. It's a good question.
So one last question, then we'll move on here. And so this actually sounds like a really interesting one. Suzanne says it sounds like the plants, like our plants, are genetically predisposed to grow with gravity and or sun. Would we need to genetically modify these plants to be able to grow without gravity?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I don't know that answer, and I don't know if that's really a true statement, if it's a genetic thing rather than just an environment consideration. So I do know, there are a couple experiments looking at, especially like radiation effects. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but affecting the seeds and what that might do to the growth of certain plants, especially the ones for food or something like that. But so that's still active and brand new research. But as far as so there's been a lot of experiments where we've done good plant growths, and you may have seen on the news plants like the astronauts eating lettuce, various types of lettuce and cabbage and so forth. So we have a good understanding of how to grow the plants now, but in the first stages, really not understanding the surface tension forces in soil and maybe overwatering them and overcoming things like that. They can still grow plants even if the light sources are off to the side, if you think of it that way. But balancing the direction they grow in by the light source location and developing a good watering filtration system, they're able to still grow the plants. So I'm not sure if it's more of a genetic thing or not. That's a little bit outside my expertise. I'm more of an astrophysicist, but I would say that all that knowledge is very active research right now. So there's still a lot to learn in that for that to grow that and look at the genetics of plants. Okay, so let's see. I'll try to speed this up some because I got about 15, 20 more slides here. So real quick on human physiology. So the human body really puts all these things that I've been talking about together, right? We're looking at physical forces, fluid physics forces, cell responses, looking at complex systems and internal. And so again, long duration human performance in space is a big research area. And so what I have bulletized here on the right side are sort of the major areas that we're looking at. The neurovestibular system, cardiovascular, bone, muscle, immunology, nutrition, still a big thing. Behavior, and of course, radiation. Those are all active research still going on to this day. And we're learning quite a bit. So let's move over a little bit to the physical sciences. So hopefully this video in the bottom right will be playing. And I have it in loop mode, so I'll keep playing it if it doesn't. So
it's playing.
Great. Okay. So, and I'll talk about that here. So if you think about on Earth, so hot air rises, cold air kind of fills in from underneath, and you get circulation. That's sort of what the bottom or the top left corner is showing, right? That's sort of how, if you think of airflow, that's what we call buoyancy forces. And so in microgravity, we don't have these. So that's a big problem. So when you're talking about convection or combustion, like in the bottom left, the far left is just a standard candle flame that we're all familiar with. But in space, that same flame looks like that on the right. It becomes spherical. On the bottom right now, again, looking at buoyancy, and let me play this again. So on the left side of that bottom right frame, you see what water boiling on Earth would look like. But in space, you can see that you just kind of get one large bubble, right? It doesn't move up. The air kind of gets bubble trapped in one larger bubble, and it just builds. And so that's kind of behaves a lot differently when they started first seeing this. And so this affects a lot of systems that have, we had to deal with phase changes between gases and fluids. We also see the same buoyancy effects or lack of them affect how combustion works in space. So those are big areas of investigation. talking about low Earth science, low Earth orbit science, in particular Earth observation. ISS platform is a great place to look at the Earth. We do all sorts of, from anywhere from still camera images to hyperspectral imaging, using high def cameras and so forth. The unique orbit of space station lets us see about 96% of the populated portion of the Earth. That's basically about 85% of the total Earth surface. So it makes it a great platform to sense and look for all sorts of effects, seasonal effects. It's different from a geo satellite that hovers over the same spot and just sees the same location all the time. Space station doesn't do that. So we're able to respond to look at natural disasters as well as look at climate change effects and all sorts of things. As far as these remote sensing, this is just sort of a graphic showing all the possible types of things that we have instruments looking for. So like I already mentioned, climate science and hazard assessment, and there's a lot of mapping, soil mapping, hydrology, all sorts of things like that. We have an experiment looking at water content in the rainforest, for instance. So it's a great platform to look at the Earth from and do this. See, so astrophysics and fundamentals. So if we look in the other direction, depending on the location on the station, we have great views to deep space or towards the sun. It kind of depends on the science, but we're above the Earth's atmosphere where we miss all that interference from the atmosphere that a lot of us ground astronomers often see. So that makes it an ideal location for astrophysics instruments and so forth. So and I'm going to talk a little bit about these, but in particular the NICER instrument, which is in the top left picture, and the AMS instrument on the top right. Just give you an idea on the outside of the space station. So this would be the view of the space station flying towards you. And these yellow circles are the various external payloads locations pointing with arrows pointing to various experiments out on the space station. So I'm not going to talk about all these in detail, but later on I'll give you a link if you want to find out more information. These are some of the experiments you might be interested in on some of the externals. And then also, so in low Earth orbit, as far as I kind of mentioned this earlier, looking at these external environment effects and how they affect some of our technology development and demonstration. So there's been a huge surge in the focus of technology development and demonstration area, especially the more we're focused on exploration. The reason we do the development and demonstration is really because the reliability is so important. The further we get away from Earth, the more critical that reliability is. And so the ISS is a place where we can prove some of this and raise what we call this technology readiness level. Enough so that we can use it, maintain it, understand it, and implement it in some of our let's say our lunar missions or even our Mars missions coming up. Some of the technology demonstration areas, just a snapshot, but we have technology demonstration experiments and hardware in just about all these categories. Ranging from human-rated systems, robotics, communications, and entry, descent, and landing systems, space power and energy, all sorts of things like that. And so, a lot of this can be linked to. We have an ISS technology demonstration plan, and it's also linked to NASA roadmaps and visions for the future, developing future technology for missions. And then finally, in the education outreach area, astronauts are some of the most iconic and recognizable spokespeople for NASA, right? We inspire students to get excited about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, through interaction and observation of the ISS astronauts performing scientific and research experiments and interacting with them. Students and educators learn STEM through lots of different examples, some of which are partnerships that we have with the National Center for Earth and Space Science Education. Also, a program called Established Program to Stimulate Competitive Research, EPSCoR. There's competitions, robotics, there was something called Spheres robotics competitions and something called Genes in Space. And then we have all sorts of programs where students can, there's something called the Sally Ride Earth Cam. Students can task, they require images, and astronauts run this camera system, and it's almost automated, and they can capture images and use them to study geology and some of the climate stuff. There's also other programs like Hunch, engaging high school students to help build ISS hardware and so forth. So there's a lot of outreach in education area. So what we do on ISS in terms of research is so broad that really nobody can really know everything there is, what's going on and what comes from all the research we're doing. It's just too hard to quantify. The knowledge on these experiments is often used to produce outstanding products or processes that benefit life here on Earth, as I mentioned. When we talk about the benefits, there's really three types. There's what we call pure discovery, future space stuff benefiting, enabling future exploration, and then there's Earth benefits. And so let me talk real quickly. I'll try to wrap it up here, but I got a couple examples here. So for instance, what are some of the benefits? So, so for vision, for instance, so one of the important things we've learned on long duration missions in space, which will apply for long durations like to the moon or Mars, is about 60% of long duration current astronaut missions, and 29% of the short duration astronauts have experienced significant decrease in eyesight. A portion of those percentages, some of that's been recovered, but a lot of it they haven't. If you think about your eyeglass prescription, there's been changes up to 0.5 to 1.5 to 2 diopters on your prescription side, and so that's a big deal for vision loss and vision changes. This is still an active area of research. We have various experiments looking at eye pressures and so forth. So here's a picture of Karen Nyberg using this fundoscope to image her own eye for ocular health. So this has the opportunity to help both, not only for the astronauts on these long duration missions, but also for ground base and regular folks here on the Earth, trying to understand what's going on with their eyes and how that changes over time. Another area, drug development, and this is really big, especially given the commercial demand and increase that we're trying to promote. One area, we call it crystal growth, protein crystal growth, PCG. Really, when you're in microgravity, you can grow more uniform and larger crystals than you can on the ground. And so some of the drug companies have been studying these since 2002. Some of the Japanese have identified new molecules by growing these proteins in space. These new molecules that are more effective at reducing the expansion of muscle necrosis, for instance. That's just one example. So these particular results have led to improvements in like the study for muscular dystrophy, Duchenne muscular dystrophy, for instance. These are just some of the examples. PCG experiments can also lead to new therapeutic drugs and delivery methods that can reduce or eliminate the visits to the doctors, for instance, here on Earth, given that it's the right prescription and dosage and so forth. The company Merck used ISS research to develop subcutaneous formulation of the immunotherapy drug Keytruda, which is currently administered via an IV. So if that's successful, this helps reduce pain and discomfort and side effects and cost as well. So these are just some of the applications. An area called regenerative medicine. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services estimates that 22 people die every day while on the transplant list due to organ shortages. So manufacturing organs is a big deal for that and for a really long duration flight. I kind of talked a little bit about the problem of growing tissues in microgravity on Earth because you need a support structure. So in microgravity, they grow, it's all connected and it looks more like a normal human tissue. You don't have to worry about dissolving or removing and damaging the tissue by a support structure like we would on the ground. So there's something called the biofabrication facility. It's a platform for researchers to print organs. We call it it's like a 3D printer for human organs. And so that's under development. It's up there and it's the first stepping stones to, long-term plan to manufacture organs, human organs in space using 3D printing techniques. There's also, if you look on the bottom, sort of bottom middle right, an astronaut holding this chip on a glove that's called a tissue chip. They're basically miniature models of living organ tissues that model structure, mechanical forces, and physiological function of various human organs. So those are sent up quite frequently and to study those interactions, which all have benefits on the ground. And then I'll talk about, let me skip, I know we're running out of time here, but let me go to, so this is an astronomy group. So let me talk a little bit about some of the astrophysics here on ISS. We have something called MAXI, NICER, AMSO2, and Calais. MAXI is basically an all-sky X-ray observer. You may have come across that in literature. It's been up there for quite a while. It's looking at X-ray sources, and it's responsible for the first documented evidence of a supermassive black hole consuming a star. Because of the need to monitor and detect X-ray events, MAXI is really important for the astronomy community. For when it detects them, it through the astro telegram, it alerts all the ground base and other satellite community to sources in a very quick manner so that they can target their own instruments. It's revealed the evidence of a hypernova, the first one we believe to be in our galaxy. We've got a couple papers on that. Also, one of the brightest black holes ever seen since 1999. There's a lot of studies on that and so forth. So I'll show some links here in a few seconds that lets you go and find where some of this research is, but I encourage you to do that if you have more time. The AMS experiment, alpha magnetic spectrometer, is looking for evidence of dark matter. It's also looking for antimatter from the original Big Bang creation. When matter was created in the first moments of the Big Bang, where did it all go? That's a big question because all we see is regular matter. And also looking at the propagation and understanding of cosmic rays, because those are problematic areas for radiation and long duration space travel and stay too. And then finally, there's this instrument called the NICER instrument. It's the Neutron Interior Composition Explorer, and it's probably has dozens of papers in the last 6 months. It's just finding so much information. It's another X-ray imager. It's 56 X-ray tubes, finely tuned, and can target various portions of the sky. But with this instrument, we're looking at how maybe new states of matter with very high densities and temperatures, such as that is the interior of a neutron star. We're also looking at how cosmic accelerators work, and especially looking at X-ray events and so forth. And then really what controls the mass, radius, and spin of certain stellar quantities. NICER, when it's combined with other instruments, other satellite instruments, we're looking at X-ray binaries, black hole binaries, all sorts of processes. Last March in the Nature magazine made the cover, NICER did, where they actually had the first sort of evidence of the shrinking corona of a black hole being detected, going from about 100 kilometers down to 10. And NICER, through its precise timing, was able to detect this effect. And so I don't have a lot of time to go into all these details. Maybe we can talk that about another time. But the next question is, I know we're just about done here, but where can you find a lot of this information? So I'm kind of scrolling through this pitch that we can make available. I'd like to encourage you to go to, so there's a web page called the Space Station Research Explorer that lets you, basically you can put in, you can do a keyword search on any type of science, or there's tabs. If you look on the right side picture here, there's tabs that let you look in different disciplines, and you can just type in certain words and you'll find experiments, and that leads you to
So we lost you there for a moment. See, I think we lost Brandon.
I'm back in a second. The
There
storms
we
are fierce. It's Dave. I also have storms in my area, but it's been okay so far.
go. Well, we could have looked at the weather radar to see whether there were, oh, we really lost him.
Oh
Look at the
no!
weather radar to see whether or not there's, some really big cells going through his area. And he's back.
Well, it's just me, actually.
okay. I'm back. You guys there?
Yep, we're here. We figured you must have had a big cell come through or something.
So I just really have one more slide, and then I can take some questions. But
Okay.
let me put it back in presentation mode. There's also this. If we're, we just kind of hit the very light surface.
Yeah, you need to
covering
share your screen so that we can see it.
Yeah, let me do that here. Let me just talk it. You guys still there?
Yeah, if you want to turn
Yeah,
your video on,
Zoom's-
that way we can see you too.
Oh yeah, Zoom's kind of acting funny on me right now. But be thinking of some questions while I try to get this working. But oh, here we go. Let's see.
So we've got do you want to just walk that through, and then we'll go to a couple of the questions. Oh, here we go.
Sure.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Sorry about that. Zoom kind of went flaky on me there for a second. Yeah, so I just wanted to show, just so that you guys can see it. We're in our third edition of this ISS Benefits for Humanity book, and so it really goes into a lot of detail. Some of our group members put a lot of effort in producing this. So this has got some really good information of what we're doing on station. And if you just go to www.nasa.gov/station benefits, you can get access to that. And then finally, if you want email access, you just go to this website at the top here. It takes you to a form. You just put in your email address, and you can get live updates. I think it's almost weekly, or it could be daily. I can't remember what it is now, but you'll get updates on current research results and activities going on currently on space station. And you have it all right there. So I'll just leave this page up and try to answer some questions, but this is really the meat of it. I have a lot more information, but not enough time to go through it. So I hope you got something out of it, but I'll be happy to take questions.
Yeah, this is great. And so I know that we've got a number of questions here about just kind of the orbital mechanics and dynamics of the station. But since this is about the research, let's kind of stick with those questions. And so the idea of the vision loss seemed to resonate with some of the people. And so there was a couple of questions. I'll kind of lump them. Did the research tend to show that they were more myopic or more presbyopic? And was there a correlation between the vision loss and the age of the astronauts?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I probably have to defer you to the research on some of that, because number one, it's still an active area of study, and I don't believe it's correlated even between male and female. I'm not sure if I think there's kind of distributions on both sides. So I'm not sure if they have enough data points to make a, a significantly statistic find like that. But there's certainly, what's interesting, I think I'm trying to look up the numbers I was quoting. So there's been a suite of astronauts that have stayed on what we call long duration missions, anywhere from 6 months to a year or over a year, and then certainly shorter missions. And you have sort of different percentages of folks, and then even within those different distributions of results. So I can't really give you a better answer on that. It's probably tied up into the research, and it's still a very active area of research right now.
Okay, so one of the areas I know that the radiation environment in space is a concern. So do the ISS astronauts wear dosimeters during their time on station?
Yes, definitely. So they all have personal dosimeters, and we have a lot of dosimeters mounted all around the interior of space station, and we have new ones coming up and going all the time. And we even have some coming up with some of the experiments to help correlate some of the findings, with particular radiation events and so forth. So yeah, radiation is very well documented, and we have good models now that we can predict a lot of it given solar conditions and so forth.
So one of the things I know is a concern is if there's a coronal mass ejection or an event on the sun, and they have a protective space that they can go to that's a little more protected. Is that true?
Yeah. There's certain areas in station that are more shielded than others, and so there's a group called the Space Radiation Analysis Group that essentially sits on console and monitors solar weather, and they're tied into some of the NOAA assets and so forth. And when there's a sense of solar storms coming and that it's going to be a problem or not really a problem, but that there'll be elevated levels, they can make recommendations to the flight team, and if it's high enough, it doesn't happen often, they can direct the crew to take shelter for a certain amount of time. So as we branch out into demonstration, and we're developing radiation dosimeters and instruments that are tied into like the caution and warning system of the spacecraft, so that kind of get more of a real-time warning to the crew as well. So we're working on things like that too.
Okay, we're going to go for just a couple more questions here, and so we apologize for all of the really great questions that we're not getting to. So we have a question about what kind of behavioral changes do you sometimes see with the astronauts due to the microgravity and the environment on station?
You mean like once they return, or while they're up in space? Or both?
Or both. So.
Yeah. So to be honest, it's a little bit outside my expertise area, but we all know that exercise is a big thing, right? So we know that they pretty much exercise every day, and we find that the more they exercise, the better they are from when they return to Earth.
We lost you again. So someone's there. Dave, Vivian, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So Brandon, stop sharing.
There's Brandon.
Okay, so that's gone. So
I'm back.
So why don't we go ahead and let me do one more question, because I think that this is probably, and we'll call this good. So Suzanne, and maybe this is more of a statement than anything else. So Suzanne notes that She wishes that the news media would emphasize some of these really cool research in layman terms that people can understand, so the general public would understand the importance of the research done on ISS. I had no idea the extent of the advantage of doing research up there. So
Yeah, that's always been a big problem. So we're making a big effort in our group and working with better websites, for instance, the Benefits for Humanity book. Yeah, we're trying to get the word out. We're doing our best, but you're right. I mean, it could be better. Within the research community, obviously a lot of folks understand the benefits and so forth, but I would say for the lay person, the average person not hearing a lot of this, that could be, we could be better at advertising that, but that is a good point, and we need to be better at that for sure.
of course, that's why we have you on with this group too. So to help better, distribute and disseminate all this great research that's going on. So
appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's all for tonight. Thank you very much, Brandon, for joining us this evening. And thank you everyone for tuning in. You'll be able to find this webinar along with many others on the Night Sky Network website in the Outreach Resources section. Each webinar's page also features additional resources and activities. We will post tonight's presentation on the Night Sky Network YouTube channel within the next few days. And then join us for our next webinar on June 16th, when, and you actually alluded to this a little bit, Bruce Pittman from the NASA's Space Portal Office is going to share with us the present and future of commercial ventures in space. And so that kind of goes right along with some of the things that Brandon was telling us in this presentation. So it all fits together eventually, doesn't it?
Oh yeah. Yep. Well, it's exciting times right now too. So
it is. It is. Well, thank you very much, Brandon. This is
okay.
Wonderful. I'm so happy that we were able to connect with you. I'm sorry that we had a couple of technical glitches, but let's blame it on those pesky thunderstorms that you've got moving through the Houston area.
Yeah, I'd be happy to come back another time, and elaborate more on some of the more specifics.
And thank you very much for going a little bit over. I know we try to protect the time, especially because not everyone is in the Pacific time zone like we are. So it does have an impact. But, we had one of our presenters actually was in Pakistan. They were exactly 12 hours opposite of us, and he was up at 6 a.m.
Oh,
so,
wow. Wow.
all right. Well, thank you so much. And I will send you and Rose, I think it is, the final numbers for this so that you guys can add it into your outreach numbers.
Sure. It sounds great.
Well, thank you so much, Brandon.
Okay.
Take care, and we'll look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Yep. Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. And keep looking up, everyone, and we'll see you next month. Again, that's on June 16th for our next webinar. Good night, everyone.
Good night, folks.